Hi, everybody. So I'm Alex Kaler. Make sure you guys can all see me. So one thing going into this today is that I want this to feel like a conversation. The nice thing about social media is that there is no one way to go about using it for interior design. I'm going to share with you the things that I've learned and the things that have worked really well for me, but I encourage you to speak up and ask questions while I'm talking. We won't necessarily be passing the microphone around, but I will repeat your question so everyone can hear it. And we will do a Q&A at the end, but interrupt me and ask any questions that might be helpful for you. So the first thing I want to start by saying is introducing myself. I'm Alex Kaler. I'm an interior designer from Chicago. And if you guys are on social media, if you have any sort of interior design presence, you know that there are designers out there who can, there's the Amber Interiors and the Studio McGee who have millions of followers on Instagram. That's not me. I have, probably 70,000, I think, somewhere in there. And for me, that has happened slowly and organically. And the things I'm going to share with you today are not just building the following, but how I used social media to accomplish the goals of my business and me personally, in a way that felt really authentic to who I am. So I guess I'll get started. So let's see here. Okay, so this is kind of an outline of what I'm going to go through with you today. So as you're thinking about your social media plan and how you want to use specifically Instagram, which is what I'm going to talk about today, I want you to think about who you are, not just as a designer, but also just as a person. What are the things that make you feel good? Where do you feel most comfortable? Where do you feel like you thrive? And how do you want to be viewed by your potential clients? What is your goal with your desired social media audience? And then what are your long-term career goals? And then moving into sort of an execution phase of how to use Instagram. So posting to serve those goals and using your audience to help accomplish those goals. And then lastly, bringing your goals to life in a really authentic way. So here we are. So who am I really? The first step before figuring anything else out is to understand who you are. So I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm an entertainer, and I post about lifestyle. I don't just post about interiors. This is a decision that I made really early on, was that I didn't want to have this perfectly curated Instagram persona. I wanted it to really be a representation of who I am outside of work, at work, but I felt really strongly that I wanted to walk into a meeting and have those potential clients really know who was walking in. So figuring out who you are. So what social media voice is going to feel the most authentic to you? Because mine is not going to be yours, and yours probably won't be mine. So for me, authenticity meant to show the whole picture, to show my kids and the chaos and the anxiety, not just the finished pretty rooms. So I'm going to share with you my most liked, my most engaged with post that I've ever had, which you'll see here. It's a little short video. It says, "Take a tour of my 10-year-old daughter's bedroom." So we're coming in. I had just moved into a new house, and I had been getting nonstop requests for house tours to share the room, to share different rooms, to share finished spaces, and I didn't feel like I had it, because what I had was my daughter, who's a hoarder, and she doesn't throw anything away. I found very, very important empty boxes of macaroni and cheese in her room, and things that were so special to her. And so this is why I couldn't give a tour, because this is what my house actually looks like. And this was the highest engagement I've ever had, the most interacted with, and I think so much of that had to do with the authenticity of it. Just hundreds of people commenting like, "Oh, my child is a hoarder too," or "Don't worry, I had a hoarder and they grew up to be a neat freak," or we've all sort of been there in different ways, and whether it's your partner who's a mess, which I also happen to have one of those, I think I walk into clients' houses all the time and they expect that my house looks like a styled magazine photo shoot. And I have jars of dried pasta on the counters and my dog is sleeping under the stove. That's not what my house looks like. On a good day, if I'm entertaining, sure, I would love my house to look like that, or I'm shooting it, great. But I have people constantly apologizing for the mess of their house when really it's just them living in their house and a family or whoever it is. That's just real life. And there are designers who really sort of capitalize on this aspirational aspect of design on social media, and I think that there's absolutely a place for it. Designers who have this really beautifully curated feed and their stories and everything is aesthetically aligned and they rotate through colors on their feed and things like that. It's just not who I am. And I knew I would never do a good job of being that sort of aspirational only presence on Instagram. So let's see. So thinking about how I want to be viewed by potential clients. So these pictures here are both things that I've posted on Instagram. One is a picture of a sofa that says, "Strip and save all the fabric, client has separation anxiety." This was a beautiful sofa that I had in my old house. I loved it, but the fabric didn't work in my new house, and I just could not wrap my head around throwing this fabric away. And I just he really got me. My workroom understood that I didn't want this going in the trash. The other one is a picture of my wallpaper installer's sign that says, "Hand-painted wallpaper, do not effing touch, no water." So these are the types of things that make me smile, that make me a real human being. They tap into my sense of humor. They tap into my lack of formality. And they're things that I really want to put out there to give this sort of unfiltered look into me, but also into my business. And these are signs that, could end up at a client's house too, if they're comfortable with that. And I think that, it feels really important to me that when I have that very first meeting and I'm introducing myself, we're about to form this really intimate long-term relationship, right? Between the designer and the client. We're in their house, we're in their family, we're in their space, we're spending their money, you get very, very close, but that closeness can sometimes be one-sided. And there's a time and a place for it, of course, and you're not there to be their best friend, but I do think that a lot of that trust is built based on them feeling like they know you. And that's been something I always really tried to pay attention to. And I had a client recently who had just done a house in New York with a different designer, and they moved to Chicago and hired me. And she was laughing. She said, "Within the first week of working with you, I know more about you than I did my other designer in 2 years." And I said, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. For me, it's a good thing. I hope it's a good thing for you too. And she said, no, that's why I hired you, because I got a sense of that on social media, and that was important to me too. So that's kind of, thinking about how those people view you. So the next piece of it is, who is your audience and what is your goal with them? So yes, of course, you hope that your followers are people who are potential leads, people who will come to you in a month or in a year or in 5 years to hire you to design their house. But oftentimes that's a small percentage of who your followers really are. They're the people who are those sort of design lovers or people who like looking at interiors for the aspirational component of it. And so I was trying to think about, okay, if I want to grow and pick up as many leads as I can in the process, how do I do that? And I know that it's not going to just be the potential clients. And so I wanted to connect with people. That felt important to me, to not have social media feel like this completely one-sided relationship where I was just talking at people. And so what I started doing pretty early on were these Friday Q&A sessions. And the questions that I get are somewhat boundary crossing. I choose not to answer the really, really personal ones that I feel like are maybe not appropriate for a stranger to ask. But there are things like, what would you wear if you went to the Masters? I'm not a stylist, I don't work in fashion, but I think people start to see a side of you and you become sort of this tastemaker instead of just a designer, instead of just this one category. And you hear people talk about how designers present themselves, how they dress to a meeting, the types of things that they wear. Like, those are things that clients are taking in as part of your taste level. And so this is an opportunity to share that in a diverse way. Sometimes I do get wallpaper ideas for a man's office, or share something about yourself that might surprise us. And for me, this is a way that I can connect with people, feel like I'm putting myself out there, but also getting something back. And that keeps me engaged, because I think sometimes social media can feel like this grind of like another thing on your to-do list. This isn't your job. You want to be designing. You don't want to be feeling like you're being dragged back to this app on your phone. And if you feel like you're getting something back from it, I think that can be really, really encouraging and motivating. And at the end of this, I'm going to share with you guys a survey that I sent to past and present clients about social media. And it really kind of drives this all home, just how incredibly important of a tool it is. The Q&As take me very little time. I tend to do them every Friday, and every week I get people who say, like, oh, I've been saving all week to ask you this question. And then, like, the Wall Street Journal ended up doing an article about how designers' Q&As are a way for people who can't necessarily afford a designer to still collect some advice or resources. And that ended up being really unbelievable press for me. And so I think it's important to think about, in some ways, yes, I'm giving away a source, right? I'm saying I would do this Philip Jeffries wallpaper in a man's office. And I think sometimes as a designer, you want to keep that. You say, you have clients who are paying for this information. I don't necessarily want to be giving it out for free. And I am one of those people. I'm not sharing every paint color. I'm not sharing every textile source. I do feel strongly that my clients are paying for those things. But I think if you can give a little in something that maybe someone hasn't paid for, so this example, this is a wallpaper I did in my own house. My own house I tend to be a really open book with. People feel like, okay, she's willing to share. And there's a boundary that we're maybe not going to cross, but there's a lot of information available here. So I found that to be a really useful tool in connecting with people as well. So the next piece of this is, what are your long-term career goals? So I knew really early on I had no dreams of having a big firm. I don't love managing people. I don't think I'm very good at it. And I love playing with fabric and choosing specifications for a project. And I was worried that the bigger I got, the less of that I would do. And so I didn't have dreams of a 20-person office, but I did have dreams that I think a lot of people do, obviously aside from just wanting to be profitable. I wanted to be able to put my work out there in a meaningful way. And of course, that means getting published and having your work shared in a variety of different outlets. But it also meant being able to share things that were design adjacent, but meaningful to me. So here on the left, I don't have the actual video, but it's a video that I did with Schumacher and Frederick to share holiday traditions that my sister and I have, and how we incorporate our kids into it, and things that were passed on from our grandparents. And I had decorated my sister's house, and so the backdrop was a project that I had done that I was really proud of. But the bulk of what we talked about was something completely separate. And so that was something I knew I always wanted to do. At the bottom there, the how to decorate and how to do that, those are podcasts that I've been featured on, and there are opportunities, again, to connect and share a little bit beyond. So the way that I then used social media to accomplish these things, because I think that's what the big question is, okay, now I've identified what my goals are, but how do we make those goals happen? Because there's, I don't know, I heard some statistic the other day, there's 105,000 registered interior designers in the country, something crazy like that. There's so many people, and so how do you break through that noise? So you figured out who you are, you've identified what you want your voice to be, and what is the next step? So when we're thinking about accomplishing those goals and using, in this case, Instagram, I think that how you can think about it is, if your long-term goal is you want a licensing deal, start tagging brands. Start bringing yourself to the front of mind for them. start featuring their products, tag them in beautiful photography that they'll hopefully use for their own marketing, make them aware of you in whatever way you can. And at some point, a savvy social media manager is going to say, hey, this person is using a lot of our product. We should reach out to them and see, maybe we can, do a product exchange, or we can do a collab, or we could do a feature. And then those things grow from there. And if that social media manager doesn't reach out to you, reach out to them, because you have a rapport at that point, even if it's one-sided, where you're consistently using their product and featuring it, and that's free marketing for them. And so you can't have any hesitation in reaching back out and saying, let's make this mutually beneficial. I think you'll be amazed at how often people are just really excited to be thought of, even big brands. The other thing that you're thinking of is if you want to be published, if you have a specific publication in mind, not only following that publication, but following the writers who write for that publication, the editors, the photographers, the stylists, the designers who've been featured in that publication. So this is a really big, wide-reaching opportunity for you. And some of the publication opportunities that I've had have come from a writer who I was doing a tag sale and selling furniture that I had in inventory, and one of the writers from a magazine came to the tag sale and we connected, and I reached out to her a few days later and said, hey, it was so nice to meet you. I have this project, I think it would be great. And it was just, that was the only in I needed just to get past that general mailbox that everything gets sent to. So the more often you can make those authentic connections, I think the better, and social media is such a great platform to just send someone a DM. And yes, of course, they get ignored sometimes, but more often than not, you get a response. And then the other piece of this is, I mentioned it before in terms of magazines, thinking about the editors, the writers, the photographers. But for me, my other big long-term goal was that I wanted to write a book. And I didn't even know what that meant, other than the fact that I really felt strongly that I wanted a physical thing that held my body of work that I could show my kids. That it was purely selfish. It felt important to me as a mom to say, I know I missed this, school performance, but this is what I was doing. And I didn't know what it would entail to write a book. I didn't know how to make it happen, but it was something that was always in the back of my head. And so I used social media over the course of a lot of years to figure out, okay, who are the agents people are working with when they're writing a book? Does it seem like it's important for them to use the same photographer across their work so that there's continuity in the photography of a book? And just sort of information gathering. And I really used Instagram to do that. And then when I finally felt like, okay, I have this body of work that could potentially be something, I felt like I at least had kind of a Rolodex. And I said, Jill Cohen is someone who, her name comes up all the time from people who want to write books. You see her tagged in, every big Rizzoli book. And she's now the publisher of Lux Magazine. So this is a very, very connected person. And I thought, okay, if I'm gonna do this, let's start at the top. Let's try to get a meeting with her. But she's not an easy person to cold call. And so I backed out of it a little, and I saw the PR teams who were managing a lot of Jill's book launches. And it was particularly one PR firm out of New York. And I reached out to them. I got connected with them. They connected me with Jill. I ultimately didn't end up working with her, but it was this process of gleaning information and figuring out where I felt comfortable and where I would be a good fit. And I always say when you're on Instagram, you want to be in information gathering mode. So yes, of course, you're there to take in pretty pictures and have the inspiration and all of that. But people are tagging their photographer, and that's a great way to find someone to shoot your projects. They're tagging, sources sometimes. All different things that you can really take away and apply to your own work. I think as you start to post, my personal opinion is that it's really important to post your own work and not post other people's. I know that there are people who've built really big, successful accounts by sharing photos of work that they're inspired by that isn't necessarily work they've done themselves. it's not for me. I think it's a little bit of a misrepresentation. Even if it is maybe your aesthetic, I think your feed, your stationary feed, static feed should be your work. And if you don't have a body of work yet where you feel like you have enough content, take a picture of a beautiful bouquet of flowers on a table. You know, it can be a little vignette, but if it's something that reflects your taste and your style, it will resonate with people and it will act as this evolving portfolio that is really, really meaningful. 99% of designers you talk to, the project that got them started was their own house. And oftentimes, like me, that was my 2-bedroom apartment when I was 26. It wasn't a fancy house, but I was able to have some professional photos taken of the few corners that were nice enough, and share those and get some traction. And so I think as you post, that's what you want to be thinking about. I personally try to dedicate about 90% of my static feed to completed projects, especially now that my book is out. I had a lot of work embargoed before, and so I couldn't necessarily share those things. But I do think it's important when someone clicks over to your feed and you have that one chance to make a first impression, that it's curated and it's aesthetically pleasing and they get a really good kind of hit of what you offer. Instagram has a way where you can pin certain posts to keep them at the top. So if you have something that's either really well performing or really representative of you, I think it's nice to have those things pinned at the top. And then if you do want to share a little bit of the unedited, unfiltered version of you, stories is such a great place to do that. And I do have like a little bit of the mess in my feed. So it's not to say that I keep it exclusively in stories. Again, I think you have to figure out where you feel comfortable. As my kids have gotten older, I've realized I don't necessarily want to be posting them all the time. So that's a place I've pulled back a little bit, although they think it's very cool and they think they're like little celebrities, which is even more reason not to post them. But I think just figuring out, it is an aesthetic job, right? And you really get a pretty short period of time where someone clicks into your profile and decides whether or not this is someone that they want to follow. So let's see here to make sure. And then the other piece of this is playing the long game. So I mentioned this at the beginning. I am not someone who has hundreds of thousands of followers, but what I do have is incredibly high engagement, somewhere around 18%, and I think usually like a high engagement account is around 6%. And I really make a point of keeping that number up. I respond to my DMs. I think the Q&As really help with that engagement number. At the end of the day, the engagement number really only means something if you're looking to have social media partnerships. That's something that those brands will look for. Otherwise, I just think it's a good reminder for me, okay, this information is being digested by people. They have questions, they want to interact with it. And that just helps reassure me that I'm at least following down the right path. So the other piece, and this is just the really unsexy, not fun part of social media, is the algorithm and playing the game of Instagram's ever-changing algorithm. And I am not a pro in it because I really try not to live and die by Instagram's algorithm. But right now you are rewarded for Reels, and you are rewarded for Reels with trending audio. And if you do those Reels with trending audio, they will reward you by putting you on their Explore page. And that brings a lot of visibility. I do it when I can, when I have the content that makes sense. When I've forced a Reel because I just feel like I need the content, they never turn out well. They never get high engagement. They never do what I need them to do. But there are some designers out there who I think do a really beautiful job of making aesthetically pleasing Reels that feel really authentic to their brand. Like Charlotte Lucas is one where I always look at her Reels and I'm like, ooh, if I could do this, I would do this all day long. It's beautiful music, it's aesthetic, it's a nice representation of her work. So I think, again, finding that niche. I'm a little bit technologically inept, and so creating a Reel is not a small ask for me. It's embarrassing how long it takes, actually. And, your time is valuable. And so you have to just weigh, is that a place where you want to really dedicate the time to? So this is what I talked about sort of behind the curtain. So behind Beautiful Rooms, beyond Beautiful Rooms, I began sharing the process, the problem solving, the mistakes, and the humanity. And for me, that built trust. So this is a photo here of what was supposed to be an install date or an install day of a 2.5-year-long construction project. And months of prep went into planning for the install date to be this specific day. And our movers and whole team of people showed up to a house that was not finished. And we could have made it work, but I felt really strongly that there was going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars of upholstery in this house, and I did not want it uncovered in a house that was still being sanded and still being painted. And thankfully, I had clients who agreed, and so we made this giant great room into our storage room. And we went home and put on our leggings and sweatshirts and gym shoes, and we were movers for the rest of the day. And we set things up how we could in a way that would potentially make sense when the time came and we could install the house. But this is part of the job. And anyone who has worked in this industry for any amount of time knows that things will always go wrong. One of the very first things that I say to people when I'm interviewing for a job is that things will go wrong. You have to trust that I will make them right for you. And if you have an expectation that nothing's going to go wrong, you're going to be disappointed by anybody, not just me. And so I think showing people through social media that this happened on our project, might happen on yours too, it kind of lifts the curtain. It makes people feel like, oh, okay, something did go wrong at my house, but I guess that kind of happens to everybody. And it takes some of the pressure off. And I think as a designer, there's nothing worse than in this case, you have an install day that you've been working years towards, and it feels like it blows up in your face. But if expectations are set in advance and you can do it, by sharing on social media, you're doing it before you even start working with people. The expectation is set. And I think that sort of dose of reality is something that I try to plug in a lot of different places in my social media presence. I remember a few years ago, I had gone to a concert, and I posted a picture from the concert, and then 20 minutes later, I posted a second picture, and I said, I think the concert was great, but I had a panic attack and left. And my dad, who's this consummate old school businessman, called me, and he was like, you need to delete that. And I was like, why would I delete that? And he's like, honey, you're going to show up to a meeting and they're going to think you're going to sit down and have a panic attack. And I was like, well, I might. Don't we want them to know that that's a possibility? I don't want them to think that I'm coming in and everything is going to be so perfectly buttoned up, because that's just not life. It's not me. And so the places where I can inject that in, I think it really builds trust, and that feels really important. And yes, there will be people who want a more buttoned up professional version of a designer, and in that case, I am not that girl. And they will know it quickly if they follow me on Instagram, and I actually think that's great. I don't think of that as lost business. I think of that as an avoided problem. And there is a reason that we have this really open, supportive industry, because there are clients for all of us. And the person who's a good fit for me might not be a good fit for you, and vice versa. And so I think it's our job to help people determine who they're going to feel good and comfortable with in this long-term, intimate relationship. So I didn't use my social media presence for validation. I used it to create momentum. And this was something that I didn't do consciously at first. This was a result of kind of a subconscious plan that I had. I think that the momentum and growth really helped me start to tell a story that years down the road would ultimately become the outline for my book. And once that goal was identified, that I wanted to do this book, I could kind of back into it and say, okay, I know I want to do it, and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna try to make all these connections on social media to try to make it happen, but I still have to write a book proposal. It's more than just, the pretty pictures that I have to offer. And what do I want that to be? And so I felt like I had this momentum on social media where people were really engaged, and I was looking at what they weren't engaged with. And it was those house tours of my hoarding daughter's bedroom. And no, I'm not gonna do a coffee table, a monograph of that, although I could. I think that I wanted to find a way where I could do a book that had a dose of that, something that felt really real and really authentic, and how do you do that? And so that really got the wheels turning for me. And as I started to reach out to people like PR agencies and publishers and book agents, there were people who that really resonated with, and there were people who were not interested. One of the publishers who I thought I really wanted to work with felt really strongly that there not be photos of people in the book. And so I knew right away that that was not gonna be my publisher. And I think staying true to who I was so hugely important in that process, because it would have been really easy to say, ooh, but they're the big one. And if they'll take my project without the people, let's just forego the people. And I'm so glad I didn't do that, but I think what gave me the confidence to not do it is that I had this social media experience, this momentum, this trust that I saw that I had built with people. And I had hoped that that would translate to book sales and interest in a book. So that brought me to my book. So this is my book. It's called A Welcome Home. It was published in September by Phaidon Monticelli. And it is very much a traditional monograph of my work. It is 8 chapters. Each chapter is a different client's home with beautiful, large photography. The difference, and it's not huge, but it's important to me, is that every chapter they interviewed not only me, but also my client. And so you get some perspective of the person living in the house and what they wanted. Everybody's favorite chapter is my client, who's got this spectacular, beautiful kitchen with a Le Cornu range and marble floors, and she does not cook. She does not want anyone to cook. When her husband makes eggs, she throws an absolute fit. It's like it's a very specific client, and I don't think a lot of people can relate to it, but it's human and it is funny and quirky, and I wanted those types of things to really come through. And how this then kind of comes back to social media is that your publisher is going to look at your social media following as potential sales. And I think that there is a myth that you have to have, 100,000 followers in order to be considered by a big publisher, or, whatever that number is. It's very arbitrary. And as I started interviewing with these people, I found, yes, that number is meaningful to them. I think when I started my conversations, I had maybe 40,000 followers. And they told me, that's important to us. That's not nothing. But if we felt like you were the right fit, we would do it for someone who had 20,000. So it's not a make or break, but they know that if someone is following you, they're a lot more likely to buy your book, and they're interested in what you're doing and what you're putting out there, and that's going to ultimately equate to sales. So this was that kind of humanity piece of the book that was so important to me. So at the end of every chapter, I took a space that was photographed in the house, and I reshot it with the family that lived there. And some of them were a little bit more anonymous. This is my sister, so we showed her face. But I wanted you to see the little girl standing on the step stool baking with her parents. And yes, it probably doesn't usually look this cute, but they do bake a ton, and the kids are involved, and they are standing on the bar stool at the counter, and the baby is sitting on the top of the marble countertops. And I think when you look at these two photos side by side, aside from the obvious, there's just so much life in that second photo. And going back to one of the very first things I said to you guys, that people have this expectation that homes are, perfectly styled and ready to be featured in a magazine. So many times I have clients who will look at a magazine spread and say, the house is beautiful, but I have 3 kids, or I have 2 dogs who sleep on the sofa, and I could never live like that. And my goal was to say, actually you can. You really, really can. Like, these bar stools are covered in a fully wipeable leather. You can bleach them, you can soap and water them. We can really design a house that speaks to however you live in your home. And that was a really important thing. And by the time I get to an interview with a potential client, that's something I talk a lot about, but I don't always have the opportunity to have that conversation. And so this felt like a really nice place to start. And it set a tone for the book. And there's all different shots in each chapter. There's one with a client who has her 2 cute little pugs sitting on this beautiful custom sectional, and another one who has her baby climbing around her gardening potting room. And you really see in a beautiful way what life looks like in these spaces, and that feels really important. And part of the reason I got into this job is because I am such a homebody, and my house is so important to me. And so feeling like I can create that for other people, and it sounds sort of cliche, but your house is where life happens. It's not just pretty, it's not just for display. And so this was something that I felt like I could take what I had been working towards in social media and translate it into something that felt really artistic in the book. So the next piece of social media, and maybe the most important, is optionality. So I don't know if you guys listened to Business of Home. Last week there was an episode with Dennis Scully and a guy named, I think his name is Seth Kaplowitz. I don't know if anyone listened to it. It was an unbelievable episode. I felt like I learned so much. But what he talked over and over and over again was how important it is as a designer to have optionality in your career. And when you are super focused on growth and on lead production, it's hard to think about optionality as a priority. But what a social media audience does is give you that optionality without you having to choose it. You have an engaged audience who likes what you're doing, who's interested, who sees you as a tastemaker, and that alone provides you optionality. And so what I'm showing here, it says Heirloom. I had this idea a few years ago that there was a sector of people who wanted somewhat custom furniture, high-end, really fun, beautiful fabrics, but they didn't want it for their whole house. And they weren't working with a designer. They were happy to go buy their oatmeal color Pottery Barn sofa, but then they wanted a chair that felt really special. And there's not a lot of places where you can do that. Since the idea came around, on my part, there are a few more places, but at the time, there weren't. And I felt like, let's create something that is custom and high-end, and my workroom, who I use for my clients, is going to build this stuff for us, and it's going to be all made to order, so there's very little overhead for me other than building the website. And it can be a place where I can experiment and see, is there really this need? In my head, it existed, but was it something that people would be receptive to? And they weren't. It was a total flop. I sold 1 chair. But what it taught me was there is actually a whole sector of clientele that I'm not familiar with. They're not calling me. They're not hiring me. And they are crafty, and they're on Pinterest, and they're finding the Coley home and the Pepper home that actually do exactly this, but with 4-week lead times. And maybe they're not solid wood frames, they're plywood, but at that price point, people don't mind. And that was where my miss was. But having a social media audience built in helped me try this out. And it was low lift. Truly, aside from building out the website, which was really just an offshoot of my existing website, I still have it up. If someone wants to order a chair, they can still go on and order a chair. But it allowed me to dip my toes into something else and see if it was something I wanted to pursue. And I think that is a really important thing as your career as a designer goes on, because you see this can wear on you. It can wear on you having clients beat up on you when something gets delayed and it's not your fault, and the tariffs are changing every single day, and you're the one who has to deliver the news. Like that can really, really get old. And so having optionality in your career is really important, and I think the biggest way that you build that optionality is by having an engaged audience. And whether that's Instagram, like in my case, or a Substack, or whatever it is. And actually, speaking of Substack, there are a lot of people who would say Substack is actually more valuable than Instagram because you actually own that list. So I think that's something to consider. But leaving yourself those options is hugely important. So this is the last slide that I mentioned, and this is value. So a few years ago, as I was feeling very underwater in all of my work and managing my projects and my employees and all the things, I realized that the one thing I really was struggling with was social media. And it was something that I knew I had to do every day. And so I tried to delegate it. I hired out to somebody to take it over, and it was a total flop. The voice was not at all authentic to who I was. It wasn't natural and organic and unfiltered in the way that people had come to expect from me, and engagement was very, very low. And so I had to pivot, and I had to figure out, is this really as meaningful as a tool as I think it is? And so I sent out a survey to my past and present clients, and it was targeted specifically towards social media. So I asked them a few questions. Every single person, every single client had followed me on social media for 1 month or more before reaching out to hire me. So they were doing their due diligence in the background before I ever knew I was being considered. Without that social media presence, it's harder to do. They're calling friends who maybe they do or don't know, who've worked with me. They're getting, some maybe helpful information, some maybe not. The next piece of it was that every single client, with the exception of one, had looked at my social media before my webpage when they were considering hiring me. They Google my name, my website comes up, my Instagram comes up, and they go to the Instagram. It is a more authentic representation of who I am. I admittedly don't keep up with updating my website every single time I have a new piece of press or a new project that's been published. I'm much more apt to post it on social media. It takes far less effort. And you don't have to click through an entire project to get to the next project. You get a little taste here and there, and I think that really resonates with people. A third of the clients had found me as a result of their friend sending them a post. So they weren't even following me, but their friend said, hey, I know you bought a new house. This would be a person you should consider. Or, I had a client who was moving from Switzerland and needed a designer, and her realtor sent my Instagram account to her and said, you should look, I think this is what you're looking for. So when you think about who your audience is and understanding that they're not all going to be direct project leads, it doesn't matter, because they could be a lead 3 steps removed, but they could still be a really important lead. One of my very first projects that was incredibly challenging in every way ended up referring me to one of my very best projects. And I think, it's not to say that you should take every project that comes through the door. If you're in a position to not do that, I think it's better not to. But you just don't know who's there and what they can bring to the table. And the last thing, and probably the most important, was that every single client said that the content I had shared on social media validated their decision to hire me after they had hired me. So as we started working together, I was seeing more and more people bringing in inspiration photos that they were pulling directly from my work versus things that they had found on Pinterest. They were referring back to things that they had seen me do on a past project. And, maybe they identified with my panic attack. I don't know. But I think that this information was impossible to argue with. it was such a resounding, strong yes in favor of how important social media was to my business. And I think deep down I knew it. I didn't necessarily want it to be the case because it kind of brought me back to feeling like, okay, we're gonna really commit some time here, but it's meaningful. And it was a great reminder for me. So that's what I have for you today. I know I jumped around a lot and no one interrupted me. You all have nice Southern manners. So let's do a real Q&A. If anyone has one.
Microphone here for any questions. Okay, got a couple?
Hi. Yes, just wanted to hear, like, in the beginning, how you started growing when you were just posting stuff, like, of your own home. How did you continue to move forward to get more and more engagement, to get you where you are? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, there's a big jump from, maybe having 500 to 10,000.
Yes, for sure. I think the biggest thing you can do is play the algorithm. And when people comment on your post, comment back. When you post, like your own post immediately, save your own post immediately, and share it to your stories immediately. Because those three things are the type of engagement that Instagram is looking for. And if you kind of start that ball rolling yourself, it will encourage more from other people. It is playing this crazy game, but it helps. And then also just engaging with people who, like, I was always told the people who you will get the most growth from are not going to be the accounts with, 50 to 100,000 followers. They're going to be the accounts with like 25,000 followers. Those are the people who are actually going to drive the most traffic to you. So I think they call them like micro influencers. Those micro influencers tend to have a really engaged audience. And you could reach out to one of them and say, like find a fashion influencer or lifestyle person and say, I saw you moved into a new house. Would you ever consider letting me redo your powder room? I won't charge you, and you'll share the finished product on your feed and tag me. Things like that. It's a low lift for you. You're choosing, a mirror and a sconce and a wallpaper, but it gets your name out there in front of an entirely new audience. I think that's what really moves the needle. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
So how much time do you spend each week, or do you do it by the month, or like how much time do you spend on your social media, especially when you got started?
Yeah. I wish I could say that like I time blocked my calendar every day and there was a chunk of time that I dedicated to social media, but it's not the way I do it. It's like waiting in carpool line and I'm like, ooh, I should throw something up. I haven't put something up today. I try to keep a backlog of content that I can pull from, and just when I'm on site, when I'm at a project, taking whatever behind the scenes pictures I can. If I'm traveling and I see things that I'm inspired by, taking those photos, even if you're not sharing them in the moment. I think a general rule of thumb people will say for people who are really trying to grow is to be posting in stories 5 days a week and your static feed 3 days a week. It's a lot. I do not stick to it, admittedly. I do my best. And I think that, even if you have shots that aren't professional but are just pretty and feel like they're a representative of you, share those. But I would not be putting aside big chunks of time. Your time is valuable. It can be billed out to clients. I think that you can put in, a half an hour a day and do some digging around, unless you're there for some really specific purpose, like you want to find an editor for this magazine and you're going to spend X amount of time digging around to find that person. I don't know, it's a little bit of a black hole. And I think that it can be great, but it also can be detrimental. And so you got to figure out where you feel good in it. I've been really, really lucky that I have never felt like social media was hurting me, like mentally, because I do think that really happens. and you have to protect yourself and your well-being before anything else. And the times where I have felt that, I really pull back. You know, I mean, there are people, like, I don't know if you guys follow Katie Rosenfeld. She's a designer who's got a pretty big following on Instagram. She's got a book coming out, and she says she, most of the time, comes on social media to post and get out. She does not scroll. She does not comment. She doesn't respond to DMs. She puts her content out in the world and then protects her sanity. And, you know, I said today, my goals are connection and authenticity. That wouldn't work for me. I wouldn't be filling up my cup if that was the way I did it. So you just feeling your way out and get a brick for your phone and lock yourself out of it. That's the best advice I can give you, because it'll suck you in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question back here, so.
Oh,
Yeah, I have a lot of pictures.
sorry.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the presentation. And my question is, do you have any apps or tools that you like or recommend for editing and perfecting your posts?
Yeah. So I've tried a lot of them. I tried Planoly, which is something where you can plan all your posts in advance. And that was something where I felt like I was losing a little bit of that realness. It felt a little bit contrived for me. I'm sure there is a way I could utilize it that would feel a little bit more authentic, but it just didn't feel that way to me. My sisters make fun of me constantly for my lack of editing and how bad my photos are. But I'm always like, it's the charm, it's me. I don't know if it is, I hope it is. But I think there are so many tools. There's Template I do use when I'm trying to create a reel. I think that that's a much easier way to do it rather than in the app. But other than that, no, I really don't. I try to keep it simple, and you know, not to dumb down anything I've said today, but like these are the things that work for me. And you could ask the next designer, and they're gonna have a completely different answer. And that's why I talked so much about like figuring out what feels good to you. Because there are so many different avenues. And like I went into ChatGPT a few weeks ago and was like, okay, I have 70,000 followers. If I wanted to grow this organically to 100,000 followers in the next 3 months, what would that look like? And it wrote me a day-by-day plan of what I would have to do it. It was unbelievable. But like I'd be a slave to my phone, and I'm just not gonna do it. So I think that type of resource is pretty unbelievable. And that information is out there, and the more people I talk to, the more people say that reels are the biggest way to be rewarded right now. Yeah. Yes.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I have a lot of still like pictures,
Yeah.
picture. And is that acceptable to turn that into a reel?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that Instagram really likes movement and motion, and so you can kind of combine some of those reels with a little bit of video short content. I'm not great at capturing video content. I'm better at remembering to take a still shot, and so sometimes I'll say to someone on my team, I need to focus on like the project. I can't be figuring out what's gonna be pretty on social media. I need you guys to do that. And especially if you have like some people in their 20s who like, this is really, they are just so much better at it. It comes so naturally to them. And I think that can be a good way to do it. The other thing too is that if you take your photos on live, they can actually be used as video content in a reel. You have to be careful because whatever words you said before the photo was taken are captured. That's happened to me before. But it's a great way to kind of like incorporate a little bit of movement without having a video. Yeah. Anyone else?
All right, so the two social media workshops that we've had today have talked about trending audio. And I'm curious because I had a business Instagram and they took away all the trending audio.
Yep.
So I was wondering, are you running a business account or is it a personal account?
So I'm running a business account. So what you will see, and I really try to tune it out because it drives me insane, is that Instagram is constantly beta testing. And so they are introducing things and then they are pulling things away. And they're introducing and they're pulling them away. And I believe from what I've read that pulling trending audio from business accounts is something that they're beta testing right now. The other thing that you guys will see that they're beta testing is taking creators' imagery and using it to sell product that is not yours, that is not what you featured. They use AI to swap it out to something else. A lot of the time it's actually a project you probably would never even use. And that is something they're beta testing right now, and there's a lot of uproar about it. But Instagram listens. And so if not having trending audio is something that you find is impacting your engagement and your viewership, start messaging and tagging them. I hope that it will come back. I was trying to do audio yesterday and it was a joke.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because we know that the trending audio is getting rewarded and then it's being removed from the creators. So it's tricky. And I mean, you can really get into the minutia of how Instagram is a little bit manipulative with their creators and the different things that they're doing to grow their business without necessarily paying attention to your business. And that goes back to what I said earlier, that there is this movement towards Substack because it's something you own. It's your mailing list. I mean, Instagram could freeze your account tomorrow. Like my entire business is on Instagram. I don't know a single way to contact those people. And that's problematic. It's not smart business. I know that. And I think that it's a lot of good food for thought in terms of, even if you're not gonna have a Substack, just creating a mailing list where you have some sort of data where you can get a hold of these people in a different way. So it's something to think about, and you can make yourself really nutty over it. So it's hard to know.
Any other questions? Okay, well, that was great, Alex. Thank you so much.